This is Manna Jagya. In this class, we are going to talk about Charlotte Bronte. Charlotte Bronte was born in the year 1816 and she died young in the year 1855. She was an English novelist and a poet, and she was the eldest of the three Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne. And she is the only one who survived into adulthood. Rest, both the sisters, Emily and Anne, died due to typhus. Now, Charlotte Bronte's novels became classics of English literature. She used a pseudonym, Currer Bell, in order to write her works. Currer Bell, Currer, Currer Bell, Bell, Bell. She used the pseudonym Currer Bell in order to write. Her parents died at very early age, and they were in all 5 daughters, and these 5 siblings had one brother also, one son also. Charlotte Bronte's parents had one son and 5 daughters. Now they all were sent to boarding school. 2 of her sisters died due to typhus. Emily Bronte and Charlotte, these 2 sisters, were governesses. They did the work of governess. In fact, Charlotte Bronte had to drop out from school in order to teach her sisters Emily and Anne, because at a very young age she lost her parents. So she was responsible. She was the eldest, and so she was responsible for taking care of her 4 sisters and 1 brother. So she had to drop out from the school, and she started teaching her sisters Emily and Anne at home. Then in 1835 she became a governess. The first novel that Charlotte Bronte had written is The Professor. The Professor. This novel was rejected by the publishers. It was rejected by many publishing houses. Eventually, it was published posthumously after her death in the year 1857. And this novel, the full title of this novel is The Professor, a Tale. Her second novel is Jane Eyre, which we'll be discussing in detail because it's really important. This was published under the pen name Currer Bell. On 16th October 1847 it was published, and it has become well known. It is included in children's classics as well, and it is one of the masterpieces in English literature. Bronte was the last to die of all her siblings, and even she died young. In fact, she became pregnant shortly after her marriage. She got married in the year 1854. Then shortly after her marriage she got pregnant, and she died in her pregnancy because of excessive nausea and vomiting. In the year 1855 she died because of the complications of her pregnancy, which causes excessive nausea and vomiting. Now, about her novel Jane Eyre, which is an autobiography. Jane Eyre, an autobiography. This was published in 1847. Now, this novel is a kind of Bildungsroman novel. It talks about this protagonist character Jane Eyre, whose parents die at a very young age, and she lived with her uncle and aunt. The aunt that she lived with is very evil. Her aunt's name is Mrs. Reeds, and they live in a house, and the name of the house is Jate Sheet. Now Jane has his cousin John, who is also evil. Now you have to remember some traumatic incidents that Jane as a little girl underwent. Because she is living with her uncle and aunt, she suffered a lot. Jane was put up in a red room by her aunt where her uncle had died, and this thing terrified Jane like a nightmare. Then she is sent to Lowood School, where the headmaster is Mr. Brocklehurst, who is again a very cruel fellow. Mr. Brocklehurst accused Jane of lying and made her stand up on a stool in front of everybody. They have this good teacher. We have some evil characters that will torture Jane, and we will have some good characters also that will console Jane. We have this good teacher called Miss Temple. Miss Temple is the teacher and superintendent who supported Jane. Then Jane also meets a girl named Helen Burns. She becomes a very close friend of Jane. She's very religious. But then Helen Burns, whom Jane loves so much, she also becomes sick of typhus and she dies. Now Brocklehurst, because of his behavior, is removed from the school. Jane had 6 years of happiness in school after Brocklehurst is gone from the school. Jane becomes a teacher in the same school, and then she has the 6 years of happiness. She also becomes a governess at Thornfield Mansion, where she teaches a girl named Adele. There they have a housekeeper, Mrs. Fairfax. Now comes the supernatural elements. In the house where she is working as a governess at Thornfield Mansion, where she teaches Adele, where the housekeeper is Mrs. Fairfax, there she keeps listening to the demonic laughter every day from the 3rd floor. Now the guardian, the real owner of this mansion, is missing. And we here meet Mr. Rochester, who is a young man, a detached young man, and he has the personality of a Byronic hero. He is mysterious. Now Jane is very attracted to Mr. Rochester, but Rochester is in love with another woman, Blanche. Now one day Jane smells smoke coming from Rochester's room, and she literally saves Rochester from dying. Now a servant girl lives in this house, in this mansion, whose name is Grace Poole. Now strange things have been happening in this house, and Jane is always doubting that what is going on in this house. Smoke is coming out suddenly, there is fire, what exactly is happening? So Jane becomes suspicious, and Rochester tells Jane that this servant girl Grace Poole, sometimes she becomes mad and she does all these things. Now another person named Richard Mason comes in Thornfield Mansion, and he is attacked and severely injured. Again Jane becomes suspicious. Why can't just Rochester fire Grace Poole? Why he has to keep such servant who becomes mad and who burns the house, and sometimes she's attacking the visitors. So why doesn't Rochester just fire Grace Poole? Now we see that Rochester and Jane are in love with each other, and Rochester is proposing Jane, and she happily accepts, because before Rochester she started getting attracted to Rochester. Now Jane one day sees a dream that a lady has torn her wedding dress, and jumped on her bed to kill her. Now after this dream, when they are about to get married, Jane and Mr. Rochester, when they are about to get married, suddenly the wedding is interrupted by Richard Mason, who was a visitor to their house, and Richard Mason reveals and tells everybody that Mr. Rochester is already married. So Rochester confesses that he is married to a woman named Bertha Mason, who is locked on the 3rd floor. So this is the woman who used to do all these mysterious acts in the house, Bertha Mason, who is locked on the 3rd floor. And Grace Poole, the servant, is her caretaker. He says that he married Bertha, and he came to know later that she is mad, and he had literally just married Bertha because of money. These are the explanations that Rochester is giving to Jane, that I know I have done this wrong thing by hiding this from you, but you wouldn't have married me. This woman Bertha, I came to know that she is mad after getting married to her, and I had only married her because of her money and the mansion. Now Jane is so heartbroken that she decides to leave Thornfield, not wanting the position of the mistress, obviously, because Rochester is already married. So Jane leaves the city. Now Jane comes across another family where they have Saint John, Dinah and Mary. It is the Rivers family. The name of the family is Rivers, Rivers, Rivers family, who take pity over Jane, and Saint John helps Jane to regain her position as a teacher. Now one day suddenly Jane finds that she has inherited £20,000 from her uncle. from her uncle that had died when she was very small. And the River family is actually related to her, and the Rivers are her cousins. Now, Saint John loves Jane a lot, and he pressurizes Jane to marry him and accompany him to India on a missionary work. But she keeps refusing because she does not want to marry Saint John. One day while she was sleeping, she feels as if Rochester was calling her because she's still truly in love with Rochester. So when she gets up, she decides that she will meet Rochester. When she goes, she comes to know that the entire estate is burned by Bertha, and Bertha has killed herself by putting herself in fire. But Rochester was saved. Rochester himself also was saved, and he lost. He has saved other people also in the mansion, but Bertha is killed in the fire. But Rochester has lost his eyesight and his hand also, and he now lives in the woods because he has no place to go. So finally, in the end, we see that Jane marries Rochester. They unite with each other and they get married. The ending of this novel is very beautiful. The ending line is, "Reader, comma, I married him." So finally, Jane is expressing her happiness with the readers that finally I married the love of my life, Rochester. Reader, comma, I married him. This is how the novel ends. Now, Jane Royce